Hello, and welcome again to the Executive Room podcast, where we delve deep into the minds of remarkable executives who have shaped the business world with their ideas and actions. I'm your host, Kimberly Afonso, CEO and founder of the KA Consulting Group, where we are today's partners to the most visible CEOs, helping them with their influence and to create more visibility. It's an honor to have Jonathan Brun join us on today's podcast. Jonathan is the founder of Nimonik, a global compliance and standards management platform serving over 900 companies worldwide. Since launching in 2008, he has grown the company into a multinational SaaS company with offices around the world in Montreal, California, Shanghai, and completed 5 strategic acquisitions. He is an engineer turned entrepreneur, passionate about long-term sustainable growth, and also helping organizations stay ahead of evolving regulations and standards. So great, let's get started. So Jonathan, you founded the company back in 2008 and have built it into a really big global compliance and standards platform that now supports hundreds of companies across tons of industries. So take us back a little bit to the early days. I see you've been in business, since 2008, really long time, great success record, almost 20 years. So what inspired you to start? How did you navigate those pivotal moments? And how did you transform your company from a small startup into where you are today?
All right. Well, thanks for having me on the show. I guess that's a few different questions at once, so I'll try and break it down as best I can. So the business started around environmental laws in Canada. So Canada has a very decentralized regulatory system, meaning that each province, there's 10 provinces in Canada, 3 territories. Each province basically has its own environmental laws. So if you're a business and you're operating in 2, 3, 4, 5 provinces, you're subject to very different laws in each province. And so managing that can be a challenge. Other countries are a bit more centralized. So the kind of the impetus for creating the product, I was actually working as an engineer in China back in 2006, 2005, 2006, and I was working for steel manufacturing. So I traveled all over China, visited a lot of steel manufacturing plants that were very near coal processing plants. So very heavy industry, very dirty, very dangerous, a lot of environmental damage. And so that sort of sparked my interest in the whole sustainability movement, which was just getting started back then, and how could I make a positive impact on the environment. So I decided to come back to Montreal, where I'm from, and got involved with a small consulting business where I was working after returning from China, and we started building this product for some of their clients. After a couple of years, the product wasn't really working within the consulting business. It just the consulting business has a certain business model, which is billable hours. A software business, you typically have to invest a lot of money before you start to see a return. So there was an internal conflict on resources, and I said, hey, why don't we take this embryon of a product, take it out of the business, create a new independent company, which is today Nimonik Inc., and change the business model, do a whole bunch of things, and try and make it a standalone and sustainable business, sustainable and financially sustainable. So that's sort of how it got started. Obviously, many things have evolved over the last 17, 18 years. To answer your question about how did we go from that to where we are today, and I'd still say we're still a very small company, about 50, 55 employees. It's brick by brick. I'm not a believer in sort of I turn a switch and magically we're $1 billion company. Obviously there are situations where companies have been very successful and they've been able to grow very rapidly. But I think the vast majority of businesses out there that survive, that last a long period of time, it's because there was a consistent effort being put into improving the product, getting new customers, staying competitive, etc. So we're very much in that mindset of just everyday work to make the customers happy, to improve the product, pay attention to what's happening in the market, iterate, iterate, iterate. So it's just been a one day after another. Is just sort of the way I would put it. There's no magic recipe or shortcut. I'm not a big believer in shortcuts. So anyways, hopefully that answers your question. Let me know if that makes sense.
That's great. And I've seen that myself. I have friends with similar businesses who have grown, you can say little by little. It's still, a decent sized company to have 50, 55 people, but similar things. And sometimes that steady growth is a lot more sustainable
Right.
than rapid. So thank you for sharing that. And I loved hearing your story about China. Is that what inspired you to expand internationally? And how did you decide on the timing of your company's, global expansion?
So I think I always wanted the business to be quite international. I enjoy traveling. I enjoy working with people all around the world and international businesses that have operations all over the place. So that's sort of just probably my DNA. Um, and so we have an office in Shanghai, and we obtained that office through an acquisition. So in 2017, we bought a company in Shanghai that was owned by a Swedish company, and so they had established this back in 2010. And that was one of those things that's, just happenstance in life where I was on LinkedIn. I was just reading the feed as I do every day, frankly. And I saw an announcement about a business in Sweden that had been acquired, a business that sounded pretty similar to ours in Canada. So I read it and I reached out to the owner of that business. I said, hey, like, congratulations on the sale. I noticed you have an entity in China. That's interesting. It wasn't part of the press release. So we ended up having a couple of conversations over Skype. Back then, Skype was still being used. And what they had done is they had separated the Chinese business from the Swedish business because the acquirers of the Swedish business didn't want anything in China. So we started talking, and long story short, we said, okay, well, maybe it's just simpler if we buy your Chinese operation. And so that's what we did in 2017. And for sure, the fact that I had worked in China in 2005 made the deal possible. I mean, if I had never been to China, if I knew nothing about China, I wouldn't have bought a business in China. But I had experience there. I've read a fair bit about China. I speak a bit of Chinese. So there was a certain comfort level. And it was a way to go international relatively quickly, in the sense of doing it through acquisition rather than trying to do it purely organically. And I kind of use Jeff Bezos's what he calls his regret minimization framework. He talks about how when he's going to make a decision, he thinks about what would I regret doing? Like if I say no to this opportunity or say yes when I'm on my deathbed, hopefully in a long time, will I regret this? And that's kind of how I thought about that deal in China. I was like, look, this might not work. We might lose money, but I want to give it a shot. I enjoy China. I love China. I love Chinese people. And so let's give it a shot. And we structured the deal so there was relatively low risk. And that's kind of how it happened. And then we recently bought a business in California, and so we are continuing to grow internationally. We have some staff in Europe as well and in the Middle East. So the goal is to make it really a global business. But that's a little bit the China story, which again, 10 minutes later, I wouldn't have seen that on LinkedIn. 10 minutes earlier. So timing is honestly like three-quarters of the battle, I think.
It was just meant to be. And
Maybe.
I love hearing that story. I don't know as much about China as you do, but I'm also a huge fan of China. I was there a few months ago and I'll be going again in a few months, and fascinated by the culture, the growth, how quickly they've, changed everything. If you think just like three decades ago. So we could have a podcast just on that. I won't do that today, but I would really like to ask you a little bit more about it. So I'd love for us to talk about it a little bit in the fact of you have experienced so many cultures firsthand. So Canadian, American, Chinese, I'm sure others as well. What are some of the differences and cultural nuances that have influenced how you lead, and how do you find it to lead a business that is becoming more and more global?
I think at the core, people everywhere in the world are the same. I mean, I think everybody wants to have a good life, stable, job and income, be healthy, be safe, be happy. So I do, I've traveled extensively, I think, around the world, as you said, these different cultures and many others. So I do think at the core, everybody's sort of the same or has the same set of values. And, you exclude obviously some people with some illnesses and challenges. So that's kind of how I think about my interactions with people. Now, that being said, there are cultural differences just between Canada and the U.S. There are cultural differences, but like between the East Coast and the West Coast of U.S. or Canada, between Texas and New York City, I mean, there's cultural differences. So I definitely want to take that into account to a certain extent. We've had situations with like Europeans and staff here in Canada where the staff weren't as formal as Europeans would expect to be treated. So in terms of like say Mr. and Mrs. and the way you write your emails and things of that nature. So I've tried to coach people on, okay, well, if you're talking to someone in England or you're talking to someone in France or Germany, you should start at a more formal level than you would say in the US. The US is often like, hey, buddy, how's it going right away, right out of the gate. Very informal, very direct culture. Germany, France, some of these cultures more formal, more procedural. Same thing in Japan. There's some basic stuff like that, but I don't think any of this is rocket science. Then usually after a few interactions, you kind of get more familiar. You want to educate people on sort of time zone issues. There are some cultural differences, between Asia and Western society in terms of like being more about consensus in Asian countries, whether it's China, Japan, and elsewhere, rather than a bit more individualistic here. So, there's some small differences, but I do operate on this idea that kind of everybody is actually, we share much more than we have differences. And the most important thing, I think, in any interaction, whether it's a cultural difference or just a direct conversation with somebody that's of your own culture, is to listen and to listen attentively. I think that's, if I recommend one skill development that people need to have, it's sort of really focusing on the conversation at hand and really listening for all those clues and nuances that will let you know what this person wants, how they're feeling today, what are their concerns, what are they worried about, what are the outcomes they're looking for, et cetera, et cetera. I think active listening, as they call it, is just so critical. And then if you apply that, you'll also pick up on these cultural differences. And then before you go somewhere, just kind of, now you go on ChatGPT, you don't even go on Google, or you type in like, hey, what are the main like cultural differences between South Korea and the United States, and it'll already give you a pretty good crash course. So this is not difficult, honestly. Like, it's really not difficult. You just don't want to be a cowboy that like runs in and tries to railroad people, I guess.
Completely. And I completely agree with you. The more, that's something that I always say myself, the more I travel, the more you realize people are all the same everywhere. So I really love that you raised that as well. And I'd love to go into a little bit of, your story. You've built your company completely bootstrapped, no external funding. That's relatively uncommon in your industry. What have been, in your opinion, the biggest advantages and the biggest challenges of that? And how has it influenced the way that you run and scale your business?
Yeah, so we've been bootstrapped from the start. We started in 2008 with about $20,000 that we put into the business to like rebuild the software. And then over the years, we haven't taken on any institutional investors. We have put in a small amount of money, myself and a couple of other shareholders, but we're talking about like, $200,000-300,000 over the course of 20 years, and then bank loans basically to fund some of the growth. But we haven't taken on any sort of venture capital or private equity or any substantial amount of external capital. Look, I can't compare with having run a VC backed company or a PE backed company because I've never done that. So I can't really compare it. All I can say is we've done it our way, to fundamentally probably to optimize for freedom. Freedom of choice of what do we invest in, what do we do, how fast do we go, how aggressive are we. When you take on that external capital, you end up being, you end up having a boss fundamentally, and that boss is going to tell you, well, we want you to get to this level by this date because we have to exit and we need to have a liquidity event for our investors, right? So it gives you freedom. But on the constraint side, for sure, you're resource constrained. You don't have millions of dollars sitting on the sideline that you can use to hire people or to do X, Y, or Z, right? So you have to be very careful with how you spend money. You want to minimize waste. You're always going to have waste, but you want to minimize waste, and you really need to pick the right horses to bet on. So I think it makes it a lower risk operation. Does it restrict the amount of growth we get? Yeah, probably. So it's a trade-off. But I mean, I the reason I started a business is not because I want to make a lot of money. Like I don't actually care that much about the money, to be perfectly honest. The reason I did it is to have freedom, is to be able to do what I want, build the company I want to build, work with the people I want to work with, and try and build a product that I really believe in. That's it. For me, it's more like a fun game than anything else. Obviously, we want to be successful. Obviously, we need to make money to pay and live and all that. But the primary motivation is just to drive value for the customer and drive value for the people that work at the business. We want them to have a good job, stability, good career paths. And if we can accomplish that over the long term, I'll be super super happy. That it's not really that more complicated than that, frankly.
I loved hearing that because, there are so many business owners that I've met, and I think knowing the why behind the business completely, you know, puts you on a certain path or another one. So that path is completely aligned with the freedom and the stability for your employees and everything, which is really really admirable, and also something I can personally relate to, as freedom is always one of my main pillars and one of the reasons I also built my company, and also one of the reasons I've never taken any funding or anything like that. So I completely relate to that, and I think it was great for you to share that with our listeners. And I'd love to hear a little bit about, this is related. You are in business a long time, 17 years, long-term vision. You treat things as a game. I can see you don't complicate them, which I think is something a lot of entrepreneurs, myself included, it's a great lesson for many of us to have, is not to complicate things. So what other commitments or values do you have that really shape your philosophy on entrepreneurship?
My other, well, commitments, I mean, definitely committed to building a workplace that is sort of equal opportunity and where anybody from any culture, any background can come, and if they're providing value and if they're doing their job and they're growing, they'll be successful. I think I was heavily influenced growing up by people like, I'm 42, so I was born in 1983. But I kind of grew up in sort of the Steve Jobs era. So watching what Jobs did at Apple, creating a very integrated product, creating a very clear marketing message. I think some of that has honestly been lost in the last few years. But so that was definitely a big influence. And yeah, I mean, I think those values that we discussed earlier in terms of just a good work environment, stability, value for the customer, value for the team members is sort of the core. And having a long term vision. The one thing that sort of I don't like, there's many things I don't like, I suppose, but one thing I don't like is like with these various people, entrepreneurs, investors that take a business, kind of juice it up with money and marketing and what have you, and then they flip it and they sell it to somebody else who then potentially removes staff, fires staff, downsizes, trying to always trying to like kind of play this game of cards where you're flipping things and trying to get more and more money out of it without necessarily taking into consideration the very human consequences that has on particularly on the employees. So I have a great respect for businesses that have been in business for decades, if not more. I recently studied a little bit like IKEA, started in 1950s, right after the war, privately held, never gone public, always owned by the same person, and sort of just built it up over these years and provided a lot of value for pretty much everyone in the world has IKEA furniture. It's pretty amazing. And then obviously the staff members as well. But there's lots of other businesses out there that have lasted even longer. We have a client we were visiting the other day. They are 145 years old. A global company, publicly traded, called Atlas Copco. But they started in the 1880s, I think, 1870s, and to go through wars, to go through crazy societal changes, crazy technological changes, and to still be operating and thriving. To me, that's the kind of the gold standard. The guy who flips some business to a private equity fund that then fires half the staff, but he himself has put, X number of dollars in his bank account. To me, that's, yeah, you got money, but you've left this wake of damage your wake is damaged. So, anyways, that's kind of the way I think about it. Maybe it's a bit cheesy or naive. I don't know, but that's sort of how I think about it. It's a messy world, but I try to at least have some positive impact here.
And we all have to do our part. So it's amazing to hear how, you do your part in the world by keeping that type of culture. And I do think I've seen a lot of companies, especially up to like 500 employees, who I think that may be like the sweet spot where it's easier for that to happen. The IKEA example, however, large company, amazing. So it is even possible to be resilient and make a positive impact at that level. And so, Jonathan, I really wanted to ask you a little bit about AI. It's transforming every industry. Compliance is no exception. How do you see it changing the way organizations stay compliant, manage risk, and how is your company addressing both opportunities and challenges from the AI shift?
Yeah, AI. Everybody's talking about AI these days. I mean, and I think what we're talking about when we talk about AI is everybody's talking about these large language models. So the Chat GPTs of this world, and obviously there's Gemini and similar ones out there. So AI, to put on my kind of computer science engineer hat, is actually a quite broad set of technologies. But what's in the media today, and what we're all talking about, I think, is broadly speaking these large language models. And some of this agentic AI, which is again, but layered on top of the large language models that is supposed to do tasks for you and do different things for you. So this all exploded in the last couple of years with ChatGPT. We have some AI in the platform where we use the large language models to summarize laws and regulations, identify requirements for businesses. We've built some chatbots that are a bit more controlled in the sense that we control the data that's in them and they're secure. So we're definitely doing AI. And it's impacting us. It's impacting our market, no doubt about it. I think it's going to continue in that direction. I guess my belief is I think we're starting to like cool off the AI hype a little bit from the last 2-3 years, but we'll see. It's very difficult to tell. I think there's positives and negatives. Look, like with any technology, the positives is for sure it's allows you to get a lot of information much more quickly. The information is digested for you. I think that's the big kind of quantum leap. So you went from like Google or search, which gave you results, and then you had to like put everything together a bit like a puzzle. Now the AI sort of takes the puzzle, digests it, and gives you, the burrito or like whatever you wanted. So it does this work for you, which is great. Look, it makes us more productive. I think the substantial risk in almost every field, but this includes compliance where we work, is that the problem with compliance is not a lack of information. The information about what you have to do to stay in compliance is available everywhere. We even forget mnemonic, just go online. The problem in compliance in pretty much all businesses is the interface between the operation of the business and the requirements that business has as per the regulations and the laws. So everybody has access to the same information and the same tools, but some businesses are much better at staying in compliance and avoiding fines and penalties and sanctions. AI is not going to fix that problem. Like that problem is a cultural and an operational competence problem. AI is not going to fix that. Like if you have a bad company with poorly trained people who don't take compliance seriously, you can throw all the AI in the world at that problem. It's not going to work because to get the operator of a machine on your shop floor to understand what he has to do to stay in compliance, to understand the value of compliance, to follow procedures, unless you automate that machine with a robot, the AI is not going to help you. So I think we need to kind of put a bit of a grain of salt or a little bit of water in your wine, as they would say. The AI will help you find information faster, for sure. But you still have this fundamental problem of how do you operationalize that information? How do you create the culture within an organization that values high quality operations, excellence, and compliance. And that is, I would argue, a much bigger and much harder problem to solve. So, yeah, we'll put AI into our tool. We have AI in our tool, we'll put more in, we have plans. But the fundamental problem itself is going to remain, I believe at least. And I think these large language models are limited in the sense that they will never become conscious. They will never become what's called general artificial intelligence. They are basically super search. They are like Google on steroids. They search huge amounts of data, collate that data, digest it, and give it to you. So they are basically a new version of a search engine. And it has a lot of value, don't get me wrong, but it's not some sort of miracle solution to the very real problems that every organization has. Anyways, hopefully that's somewhat coherent, but that's kind of my take on AI, at least today. Maybe we can talk in a couple of years and see if I'm wrong or if things change. Yeah.
Yes, so I'm assuming you don't think that AI will solve all of the world's problems,
No.
if that's your take on it. And I really like how you shared, especially about compliance. I think with, the more complex the issue, it's not going to be able to solve that. You still need the experts who know how to solve that. So I'd love to end, Jonathan. We always talk about vocal leadership on this podcast, as you know. And one of the reasons that I invited you on is because I did see a lot of your content on LinkedIn and how you've established a strong online presence, especially sharing insights around compliance and industry standards. So, what advice would you give to other founders and CEOs who want to build their personal brand and use their voice effectively?
Well, I mean, I think the most important is to be authentic in the sense of saying things that you genuinely believe in, saying them in a perhaps somewhat like informal manner. I've never had like a PR agency or anything like that work with me, so I kind of just try to speak from the heart. And I think that resonates with people. I don't claim to be an influencer. I don't want to be an influencer. I just try to put some stuff on LinkedIn that is helpful to others. Resources, books, videos, things of that nature. A lot of it is related to what we do at Mnemonic, but it's just what I'm passionate about, and try and make my little dent or impact on the on LinkedIn, I guess, or on the world. So I think being authentic is critical. When it's this polished publications that goes through 4 reviews by all these different people, I'm not sure that's going to really resonate. So you got to figure out what you're passionate about, and don't hesitate to share that, obviously in a professional manner. But otherwise, yeah, I just try to just share some stuff, and pick up on things in how would I say it? Like last weekend, I put a post up. I guess this week, obviously this podcast will air in a little bit, but I put up a post. We went to an air show in Montreal here, and you had the U.S. Air Force Thunderbirds, which is their acrobatic Air Force team, at the show. Is absolutely amazing. I mean, it's just mind blowing what these people do. And so that level of excellence, that level of precision, of training, of discipline, I find it personally very inspiring. And so I put something up on LinkedIn just saying, here's a video, and found this really inspiring. And then I linked to a Netflix documentary that's available on the Thunderbirds team at the U.S. Air Force. So that's the type of content that I put out. It's not planned. I didn't think about this in advance. I went to the show, blown away. I wrote this thing in 3 minutes. I think there was some typos in it, frankly. And then I posted it, and I fixed the typos later. But yeah, I mean, it's just like speaking from the heart, I guess, and then picking up like little anecdotes left and right, and hopefully it resonates with some people, and that's it. Yeah, try not to offend too many people, I guess, but that's the other criteria, I suppose.
And has that always come easy to you, Jonathan? Because that's something I've noticed is that most CEOs and founders, it doesn't come easy to them to share something so authentically. So I agree. I love when things are authentic, from the heart, when you're following someone and that whatever they wrote that or even if they didn't write that, that's their thought. You know, it came from them in some way, shape, or form. So I completely agree with you. Did that always come easy to you? Do you have any advice for people who aren't they have some hesitation to share?
I think for me, it's always kind of come a bit easily. I don't know. I enjoy writing. I sort of I just take pleasure in it. I find the writing. Those are like short posts that we talked about, but even I write these longer white papers, and we have a team that helps, but I do a lot of it. I find writing helps me clarify. It helps crystallize an idea in my head. And so it's an exercise that it's not just about sharing. It actually brings me benefit because it forces me to focus on a topic, write something, get it out there at a certain level that it's valuable. So I think it's always been relatively easy for me. I know lots of leaders of other businesses that aren't, they don't share that much online, but they're very successful at their job. So I don't think it's a precursor. But certainly, I do think everybody has a story to tell. I think everybody has insights that they have, and you shouldn't be afraid of sharing those insights if they're going to provide some value to other people. I mean, I learned so much from other people that we work with at the company, even clients. You can just pick up on stories, mistakes that were made, anecdotes, insights, and so many of those small insights during a conversation that somebody has shared with me have led to amazing things. I could go on and on for hours about those, but yeah, so I think don't be afraid to share these types of insights and anecdotes, and broaden your brand a little bit online, or at conferences in person, or other venues as well, of course.
That's great. Great advice. Well, thank you for joining us, Jonathan, and until next time.
Thank you, Kimberly. Have a great day.